All right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to another episode of the 80s ADHD Guy with Ben Glenn. That is me. Welcome to episode 4. This is where we dive into all things ADHD, and I give my perspective from growing up in the 80s and how things have changed a little bit. And I will say this for the next few episodes. This is me unabridged. This is me not performing. This is the raw, the real Ben Glenn. So hopefully those of you that have ADHD or are working with somebody who has ADHD, or you're a parent or a teacher, or however you found this, this is me preparing you for the up and down and all around and the random ramblings of an ADHD guy. So a lot of what I'm going to be sharing is from my past experiences. I've got just a buttload of stories to share. I've been speaking on the subject of ADHD for years, grew up with it, and continue to battle it. And this podcast is really just an opportunity for me to share my experiences with you, maybe in a simple way. I like to try to break down complex things because sometimes this information that's out there is just like, oh my gosh, I don't understand what you're trying to say. Great example. Here we go. And this is what I do. Little tangents here. I was getting ready to be interviewed on NPR, and I thought, hey, one thing that I could do is go and find some other guys that have been interviewed and listen to some different things and try to sharpen up my skills, because they were bringing me on as the Ben Glenn simple ADHD expert. And I was given that title from somebody at an event. It kind of stuck a little bit. And they basically said, Ben, you have the ability to take something that's very complex and break it down in a very digestible way. And I am honored with that. That is, and I really do try to lean into that. So you're not going to get the great big medical words from me. I'm the guy that, you know, at the seminar or whatever, I'm going to be the one raising my hand saying, hey, that word you just used, can you please break that down? Can you make it simple? And sometimes I get frustrated because I'll listen to individuals and I'm like, okay, I know you've got a bunch of letters at the end of your name. You don't have to prove that by talking above everybody. Most of the people that work with individuals that have ADHD, if their parents have it as well. And so let's make it digestible, practical, something that is usable, really. And the reality of it is that, you know, we don't really even need to know the science behind ADHD. What we need to know is, hey, how can I function productively and have a good, solid mental health and confidence in order to find joy and to be successful in life? So, boy, I already jumped off on a tangent. But anyway, I was listening to Dr. Russell Berkeley, and he is one of the most well-known advancing researchers all about ADHD guy. And love his stuff. You can find him on Instagram. I love his reels because they're, you know, these little bite-sized things. But I'm sure you can find him on YouTube and different things. And he really does go deep into the science, and he's a doctor, and that's, you know, obviously what he does. So he was being interviewed, and I'm listening to him, and I'm getting ready for my interview, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to just kind of listen and, you know, let his interview kind of inspire me to get ready for my interview. And I can remember just getting so frustrated because about 10, 15 minutes into his interview, he kept referencing this one word, comorbidity. And he never once stopped to explain what that word meant. And I was frustrated with myself because I'm like, wait, here I am, supposedly some kind of an expert in this field, and I have no idea what in the world this word means. And so I had to Google it, and those of you that are curious, I'm going to tell you what it means. Comorbidity is the word that they use to describe an individual who has multiple diagnoses, multiple things going on at the same time. I'm not really sure. I'd have to check again if those things all have to be neurological. I mean, I don't know. Do you have comorbidity if you have ADHD and you're diabetic? I don't know. All I know is that what I read was you have multiple diagnoses at the same time. And so the really interesting thing about that is that apparently now they've done studies to prove that you can actually have ADHD and you can also be autistic, which if you've ever been around an ADHD hyperactive person and an individual who's autistic, they're quite different. What they went on to explain is that, you can have multiple neurological disorders going on at the same time. Typically one's more prevalent than the other. So you may be, leaning more towards the autistic side, but because you have some ADD tendencies, we've got to address them both. So all that said is this is going to be very raw and real. And what I have done is I know in the last podcast number 3, I started kind of going through what is ADHD, understanding ADHD. I went online, I printed off some stuff. For those of you that are just listening, I'm waving my papers here, and all I'm going to do is read through some things that can be found online, and I'm going to just give you my take on it. Some of it I may agree with it, some of it I may not, and some of it might spark a story. We don't know. But ultimately, what I'm hoping is that as you guys dive into this podcast in future episodes, and they'll get better. Let me just put that out there. This is episode 4. Hey, anytime you spend time doing something, it evolves and it grows and it gets better and you learn. And my wife is going to listen to these and she's going to give me guidance and she's going to give me corrections and I'm going to make adjustments. And so hang in there. Ultimately, this podcast is for you. I want to be a place where you can come and feel refreshed to some degree, maybe laugh a little bit. I mean, I love humor. I talked about that in the last podcast. I can't help but be goofy and weird. And like I've said many times, my students over at the church are always joking about me getting canceled. So I don't know, who knows, maybe. Anyway, hang in there with me because I am ultimately doing this for you. And, selfishly, I'll throw this out there. It is also helping me process my own ADHD. In the last podcast, I did touch on the fact that, hey, once you have this, you always have it. Unless you have the social onset ADHD called VAST, and I'm not quite finished with that book, ADHD 2.0 by Dr. Ed Hallowell and Dr. John Rady. I don't know if they'll even dive into it. I'm 2 chapters away, and I don't think they will. Is there anything that we can do as a society to reverse the social effects on individuals that have the ADHD qualities but don't actually have the neurological disorder? And I don't know. So anyway, let's dive into this. Symptoms and diagnostic criteria. Let me review on the other thing that I had mentioned in the last podcast. Reading out loud from a piece of paper is not one of the things that I love to do. So this is also part of me, getting over some of my own insecurities. It's interesting. You can be in your 50s and still have insecurities. There you go. It's funny how those things that you struggled with as a kid, they just don't really ever go away. They're always kind of like looming in the behind the scenes of, oh, wait, you remember when you were a kid and how terrifying that was? Yeah, it's still terrifying. Inattention, semicolons, difficulty sustaining attention, failure to follow through on a task, disorganization, easily distracted, forgetful in daily activities. So this is one of the symptoms in the diagnostic criteria, inattention, and that's how they define it. Difficulty sustaining attention. So let me think about that for a minute. Again, the challenge is, how is information being presented? How are we, especially with these kids that have ADHD, how are we giving them the curriculum? How are we educating them? Because if you take a teacher who gets up and creates a more engaging, more interesting, more captivating environment, they can take that same information that somebody who may not be nearly as entertaining, or might even say, hey, we're going to go ahead and assign chapters 1 and 2. You're going to read it on your own, and then tomorrow there'll be a test. Those two teachers are going to present that information very differently. And if you have ADHD, you are going to respond differently on the ability to sustain, for them to sustain your attention. And maybe that's why it's so important to have an IEP. Individual education. But I can remember that was another one of those letters. And ADHD and dyslexia are closely linked. And so being dyslexic, sometimes these letters get like super jumbled and backwards. And I can remember when I first started speaking, I would do a lot of church events, and I would try to read Bible verses. And if you know anything about the Bible is written in a way where there is a book, there is a chapter, and then there is a verse. So let's say you have the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29, verse 11. Well, I'm dyslexic, so half the time I get up there and be like, I'd get the numbers all backwards, and part of that is, the race car brain. I wasn't slowing down, and of course, I didn't want to write it down because it's too much work. But all that to say is that depending upon how that person is being presented the information will determine whether or not they can have sustaining attention. And so that's where that IEP comes in, individual education plan. We're going to choose a teacher that's going to be more engaging. And I don't know, this is the struggle. This is where you're like, okay, well, why can't all teachers be like that? Are we not teaching teachers to be like this? And that opens up a whole floodgate of questions of, hey, what's going on in the educational world right now? Because from what I've heard, and I can't back this up, this is not factual, this is just hearsay, people are not wanting to get into education. That's an undesirable career. And this is, if you think about it, one of those areas where we need to, as a society, really be pouring into those educators. I'm a parent, and I say this all the time. If you were to ask me, hey, what are some of the most important things in my life? Okay, top notch, top shelf, my greatest investment are my kids. I mean, from the moment they were born, and I'm over there holding my daughter Natasha, wondering, what in the world do I do with this thing? And it always cracked me up too, because you have 9 months to prepare. In fact, that's how my wife told me that we're having kids. We'll get into a story here. That's half the fun of the podcast, right? You get to hear a story from Ben Glenn, the storyteller. So my wife and I, we were married for a long time before we had kids. We were married first. And so I can remember my mom and my dad and her parents were always like, hey, so when are we going to see grandkids? And we first started with the dog. We started with Nina. Nina was a really awesome, smart border collie. And then, okay, well, now you've got the dog. Are you going to have a kid sometime soon? No, we're going to get another dog. And then we got a dog. My wife picked out the border collie, and she did good. And then I was allowed to pick out the second dog. We got a dog, Charlie, who was supposed to be a black lab. And whoever sold us this black lab, it was not a black lab. It was like a mix between a wiener dog and a black lab. It was like this very short, very stout. It looked like a miniature black lab. I mean, she, acted and looked, but she was really long, maybe even like a basset hound. And then speaking of a basset hound, our third dog was a basset hound. So we end up with 3 dogs. There's no kids anywhere in sight. And finally, I can remember my wife and I, we were hanging out on our porch. We'd been married maybe over 10 years at the time. And we were getting older, and I was out traveling, and I was getting super busy, and my wife was doing, what she does. And my wife is a clinical. My wife is she's just a workaholic. I was trying to come up with some adjective to describe it, but ultimately this woman loves to work. If she is not working, if she's not planning, if she's not problem solving, she is not happy. This woman has no idea how to even vacation because it's just like, wait, I'm not doing the thing that I love to do. And she's good at what she does. so we were sitting out on the porch, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I'm like, I've always wanted kids. I've always, kids have always been kind of something that are like, hey, this is fun. I'm a big kid anyways. So, it was kind of like a natural thing that I thought would be a part of our life. But I was traveling around so much, and then to try to figure out how to bring kids into that type of lifestyle, didn't have any idea how we were going to manage all that. And so we literally looked at each other and said, hey, well, we're not going to try to have kids, but we're not going to not try to have kids. And then I get booked by, I get this really cool trip. This was a great tour. I was invited to come out to Hong Kong to speak to it was for the $1 Million Roundtable. So these are individuals that work with life insurance, and they also do financial planning. And it's apparently a very exclusive thing to be a part of. And so I did their huge national conference in Las Vegas, and that went really well. And so then they invited me to this one that they did out in Hong Kong, and it was great. But while I was out there, there was a couple of groups that had heard that I was going to be out there, and so they booked me as well. So then I went to Hong Kong, did my show, and then I got to jump over to the Shanghai American School and do a show there. And so we were there with all of these individuals from the United States that were over there to teach English and just teach a bunch of different students in a really unique setting. It was really cool. And they had us staying in their facility. And it was really funny that my wife and I, we noticed that all of these young couples either had little kids or were pregnant and were going to have little kids. And somehow it came up, and somebody said, don't drink the water here, because there's clearly something in the water, because everybody who comes here to teach, literally within months, they're pregnant. Well, guess what happened in Shanghai? We had ourselves a little Shanghai surprise. So hey, we weren't not trying. And so we get back to the States, and we're just kind of chilling out. My wife comes up to me. She's just like, hey, you got 9 months to figure things out because we're having a kid. I mean, there was no surprise. There was no no bells and whistles. It was very nonchalant as she's heading off to go to work. I'm like, wait a second. What can we talk? What is it? Can I get a book on it? So 9 months later, we have Natasha, and you want to know what's really funny? So I'm every bit of the ADD guy that I talk about. So, they always have these shows where the husband, he kind of freaks out a little bit and all that. And I think I was pretty calm, but it was so funny that my wife had this mindset that I was going to be this basket case, that she's having all these labor contractions and all this stuff. And she drove us to the hospital. She didn't want me to drive. And it was weird. I'm like, she's over there driving. I'm like, are you okay? What are we going to do when we get there? Are you just going to jump out? Do they valet? Anyway, so we had Natasha, and I can remember we were there for a couple of days, and it was like a day and a half. I mean, it wasn't that long. It felt like as soon as we had the kid, they were sending us home. And you're like, wait a second. I don't really know what to do here. When a kid's born, I mean, they're tiny little breakable looking things. And I'm like, dude, what are we going to do? And, it's crying, and it's pooping, and it's spitting up, and it's got to be fed. We figured it out. But I thought it was really funny that there was no real training, when you actually had the kid. Now, maybe that's where they're like, hey, you got to go take a bunch of classes and all that. I got a buddy right now who's talking about, we're taking all these classes. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe that's where we kind of fell short. We didn't do that. But anyway, wow, good memories. So I think the way that a child is being taught is super important. And that really does go back to, okay, how are we teaching our teachers? Are we giving them everything that they need to be, and I hate to say this, but to be entertaining enough to captivate attention? Is this something where we need to try to encourage individuals who are a little bit more creative, maybe even seek after more ADHD educators? A lot of people don't know this, but I actually went to school to be a teacher. When I went to college, I didn't really know what to do with my life. My mom always threatened that I was going to be a ditch digger. That was her big thing. If you don't get your homework done, you're going to be digging a ditch. And I was like, oh, can I get a good shovel? And somehow I ended up in college. I had a basketball scholarship to St. Xavier University, and the way that even came to me was very odd. I really did struggle my senior year with a lot of different things, and one was basketball, which was always something that I loved, no longer became something that I loved. It became a job with hopes for a scholarship. I didn't want to be the only one out of my family not to get a scholarship. And I was not heavily recruited. In fact, I wasn't recruited at all, where both of my brothers were. And somehow I ended up at St. Xavier, where my older brother Sam got a full ride scholarship to play basketball there. And I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no prospects. Hadn't really applied to any colleges. And I was just there playing some pickup games with the guys in the springtime. This was after the season was over. And I was having fun. I mean, the pressure was off. I was no longer, hey, that ship has sailed. I'm not going to get recruited. I'm not going to get a scholarship, and I'm just having fun. And there's a great lesson in this, and that those things that give you joy and those things that are just an incredible outlet, sometimes they do take on a role of becoming an occupation, and you've got to be careful, because if that thing loses that fun element, or you lose that joy in that, it just, I don't know, you just destroy it. At least I did. I lost the joy of basketball during the season, didn't get recruited. And so here I was with no pressure of anything, and I was having fun, and I was lighting it up. And I'd go there every week to play in this spring league. And apparently I did really well. And I didn't realize it at the time, but one of the assistant coaches was out there playing, and I schooled that dude. And he used to actually be on the team there. And so when spring league was coming to an end, the head basketball coach calls me into his office, and he offered me. He's like, "Hey, Ben, we would love to give you a scholarship to come here and play." And I'm like, "What in the world?" So I get this scholarship to go to St. Xavier. They want to know what you want to major in. Had no idea what to pick, and so I picked education. I picked education primarily because of the teachers that impacted my life. I believe it was in episode 2 where I talked about Mrs. Thielberg and what an incredible impact she had on me. There were other individuals. Dave Stevens, Coach Stevens was an incredible impact on my life. Mr. Harper, Mr. Boovie, all of these teachers were an incredible part of my story and helping me through the struggle of ADHD in the 80s, no less. Much harder back then. So I went to school to be a teacher. And then I got to clinicals. And clinicals are where you go and you're not student teaching, but you are in the classroom as an observer. And that was pure torture for me because I'm not medicated at the time. In fact, I'm not even aware of being ADHD. I have all of the symptoms, trust me. Everybody who knew me and was around me could see it, especially knowing what we know now. They're like, oh my gosh, yeah. So my job was to sit in the back of the classroom and take notes and write down everything that I was observing. And it was like they wanted like all the details. The teacher went to the board. She wrote down her name. She then turned it around and then she addressed the students. The first thing that they did was spelling. I hope they did better than I did in school because I got an F. So a couple of them went okay. But it was that third one that really derailed everything. So here I am, and I know it was a Montessori school, and for the life of me, and I can't remember what that meant, but it was something special. And my teacher was like 1 year away from retirement, and she didn't really want me there. I think the term that they use now is Karen. Maybe her name was Miss Karen. I don't know. But it was a third grade classroom, and she told me to sit in the back, not to disrupt anything going on, and that she just kind of laid down the law. I mean, she was not welcoming at all. And here I am. I am 6'4", 200 a lot of pounds. And when I walk into a room with a bunch of third graders, I'm going to get their attention. I look like a human jungle gym set. I also have facial Tourette's, which means I like to make weird faces all the time. I'm the kind of person that you kind of know what I feel or what's going on in my mind just based on my facial expression. Yeah, I, even if you're watching the video, I'm making them right now. I can't help it. So I'm sitting in the back of this classroom and I'm trying to take notes, and there are these group of boys that are back there, and they just keep staring at me, and they're kind of like, and of course I can't help but mess with them a little bit. So I start making weird faces and they start giggling, and then that teacher came down on me. And it was one of those moments where I kind of had maybe a pride ego. I don't really know, but I was just like, I kind of got a little ticked off. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to take it to another level. And I did. And she put my name on the board and started giving me check marks. And it went sideways. I mean, at the end, she said she's calling my teacher, that she's never going to let another student in her classroom, that I've wrecked all of this stuff, that I just literally destroyed everything. It was terrible. And then she said, you would make the worst teacher in the world. And I can remember going out to my car, and I had an emotional moment. I was out there in tears, not knowing what to do now with my life. And when I look back at that, there are a lot of things that we could unpack there. But I do feel that if I had become a teacher and I was in the classroom and I was able to take some of my ADHD charisma and qualities and creativity, that could have only benefited students that have ADHD. I think it would have benefited, even students that didn't have ADHD, because there would be a level of engagement there that would be it'd be entertaining, it would be educational, it would be just very fun. And that's what you want. You want education to be fun. So we only got through one here. Wow. Is he a professional talker or what? Yeah, absolutely. Difficulty sustaining attention, failure to follow through on tasks. That is a big one. I will say that is very accurate. I think that with technology and different things that we have available now, we can do better at following through on tasks. I think that we gravitate towards what's fun. My wife says that all the time. She's like, you're always wanting to do the fun stuff first. And I put a reel out the other day, and somebody did blast me for it, which was kind of interesting, where I talked about how if we can use those fun things as a reward to do the hard things, we're going to get things done. If we can say, hey, okay, if I achieve A, B, and C, and those are the really difficult things that I gotta cross those off my list today, but the reward is I get to do D. Well, doesn't that make sense that you're going to be more productive? I think the challenge is that if it's something that is a difficult task, the sustaining attention that you're struggling with to get that task done means it's going to take a whole lot longer to get it done. So the complaint was, well, you're never going to get to the fun stuff. You got to have fun. You have to have a good, and they're not wrong. If you never have fun, if you never get to do the fun stuff, well, then things just suck, and we don't want that. So it's finding that balance. There's the big B word. Disorganization, that is absolutely 100% true. What you guys are looking at right now is an uncluttered, very clean environment, but upstairs is my actual office, and yeah, it's as if the tornado boy came to visit. That's what my mom used to call me. She's like, you're the tornado boy. It's like Johnny Appleseed. We walk into a room and we just throw our stuff wherever we want. And then when we've got to go, we're like, where's all my stuff? Because you're throwing it everywhere. You're like, wait a second. Here's a really funny thing about the disorganization symptom diagnostic criteria. We actually really thrive with organization and structure. It's maintaining it. That's what we struggle with. Recently, I entered into this thing called Brick World. It is where they allow builders, people that do creative Lego building, to display their stuff, and people come and look at it and get ideas, and it's really cool. And I did it to promote GiveYourBricks.com, which you guys will hear me talk about a lot. And I was working on my creative build. I made this thing called the Alien Abduction Center, and I had like these little Lego alien ships, and these people would go through these conveyor belts, and then they would get these little clinger things on their head from the aliens, and it was really funny. It was cool. And I'm building this thing, and I'm looking it around, and nothing is organized. I mean, it's like a huge, like Lego threw up in the basement. And it was really funny because I kind of had this like weird moment of like, oh crap, I'm like my mom. So my mom is one of the most amazing, I don't know how you would describe her, but she can take a flower arrangement, and what she does with it, it's magic. I mean, we're talking like, here's Martha Stewart. My mom's up here, okay? Martha Stewart has nothing on my mom. My mom, at Christmas time, she will look at a Christmas tree, and what she does with that, with the ornaments, with the ribbons and the bows and everything, you're like, oh my gosh. It is an incredible gift what she sees. And so she was making these arrangements last November in her garage, and I open up her garage door, and it was just disgusting. And she's got like this pot with like glue and all of this weird crap sticking out, and there's trash everywhere, and there's all of this fake foliage everywhere. And you're like, how do you even, and then you have one shelf where you see the product of the insanity and the disorganization and the mess, and it was just gorgeous. So on one end, yes, we thrive with being organized, and we need to create those structures. And I always try to encourage individuals that I'm coaching that, hey, you need to have a dedicated time, whether it's once a week, once every 2 weeks, should not be once a month. It needs to be more frequent than that, where you do go in and you spend a day or a few hours cleaning and reorganizing and creating essential locations. You need to have an essential location. That's where you put your bills. That's where you put all of the things that you need to look at. You know where it is. You know what it is. And you don't Johnny Appleseed those things. You put them in that essentials location. Your wallet should go there. Your keys should go there. So you don't have to run around and be like, where did I put my keys? They're in the couch cushion again or in the freezer. By the way, that's a true story. Easily distracted. Yeah, that's absolutely true, especially if you're in an environment where you're struggling to find that focus. You become the bobblehead again. So, hey, if let's say I'm supposed to be focusing in over here on A, but all of a sudden B creeps in over here, and B is fun and funny and shiny, well, yeah, I'm going to look like I can't stay focused, and I'm going to get distracted by this. So I think that even when you consider that easily distracted, this is where you can maybe lean on your fidget toys a little bit. And you got to recognize, hey, which ones are the most effective, because there are fidget toys that become the distraction. They become the thing. Those little spinner things, and now they've banned those in a lot of schools because students that didn't have ADHD were using them, and they were very distracting. They were actually really cool. I mean, you spin it and that thing spins forever. But now they've got these infinity cubes. In fact, I've just recently figured out how to make those out of Lego. Going to try to sell those at events. But you got to be mindful. I think when you think about easily distracted, you've got to really dive into the neuroscience a little bit of, okay, well, why are we being distracted? Back to the bobblehead. Well, we've not created an engaging enough environment to capture the focus. Or we're not giving, I used to call them mild distractions. I haven't given a mild distraction. Sometimes when you see an ADD kid and they're rocking back and forth in their chair, or they're tapping their pen, that's them trying to create some type of an outlet for the fact that they are working really hard to stay focused. This becomes a mild distraction. It's going to annoy everybody, the clicking pen, but that's a mild distraction. So that's how you combat that. But that is a real deal. That is part of that, one of the symptoms in the diagnostic criteria. It's funny, when I look at the word diagnostic, my brain automatically goes to diagnose. Well, no, it's diagnostic. Forgetful in daily activities. Oh, yes. You got to set alarms. Google Calendar is your best friend. And you go into Google Calendar and you set up that little alarm. Hey, 10 minutes prior. When I was working at the church, I actually could boast about the fact that I never missed a meeting. And that was one of my biggest concerns was, hey, I'm going from a self-employed, I'm pretty much free to manage my day the way that I see fit. As long as I get stuff done, as long as at the end of the day I can say, hey, here it is. I got it done. It didn't matter how and when or the manner in which I got it done or even the time it took for me to get it done. As long as at the end of the day, hey, the things that were on that to-do list, cross them off. But at the church, there was a lot more structure and a lot of meetings. Part of being a youth pastor is meetings. Meeting with parents, meeting with students, meeting with other youth pastors, meeting with other pastors. And so I never missed a single meeting. Why? Google. So, those things are the criteria. My input is basically, hey, those are true, but there are all of these tools and accommodations that are helpful. All right, we got a few more minutes. Let me dive into the next one before we get to the next podcast. Hyperactivity, that is the symptom and the diagnostic criteria. Fidgeting, leaving seat. Okay. Let me pause for a moment. I got to just focus a little bit when I read this. Fidgeting, leaving seat inappropriately. I don't understand that. Leaving seat inappropriately. I didn't know. Is there an accurate way to leave your seat? I know what they're trying to say there, but it's just funny to me. Leaving seat inappropriately. I got up and flatulated and left. Everyone had to deal with my inappropriate smell. I don't know. Anyway, they're basically trying to say, hey, getting up and out of your seat when you're not supposed to. If you're supposed to be sitting in class paying attention, you sit in your seat. But this is funny. Leaving seat inappropriately. Running or climbing excessively. I can actually just see somebody in the workplace, maybe you work at Geico and you get up out of your seat inappropriately and you run over and you climb on something. Climb up somebody's cubicle. Difficulty with quiet activities, on the go, talks excessively. Well, clearly I would win that award. I'm doing a podcast with no guests and I'm just talking to a camera. So, hey, on that end, maybe that's a good thing. So let me dive into some of these. Fidgeting. I can remember when I worked at the church where we would be, praying for something and I could not rock back and forth. I was always rocking back and forth. And that again would be considered a mild distraction, something to help me keep my brain in the game. And so I think that fidgeting is an okay thing. But again, remember what we're talking about are the symptoms and the diagnostic criteria. So if you see that kid who's constantly rocking back and forth, tapping their pencil, shaking their leg, bouncing their leg, that may be an indicator of, okay, they may have this going on. Leaving the seat inappropriately. I think that this particular symptom and diagnostic criteria feels a lot more like your elementary age student. Those kids that haven't quite figured out, hey, wait, when I get up out of my seat and run around like a crazy madman, I'm going to have to go visit the vice principal. I think that when you get a little bit older and you have a job, you're going to probably internalize that hyperactivity. Maybe you'll bottle that up, and then when you get home, you're going to get all crazy and get nuts on, some video game or go run a lap or, get into a basketball game or go swimming or something, something to give you that outlet for that hyperactivity that you've needed to unleash throughout the day. That quiet activities, that's still a struggle, whether that's early academics, elementary, middle school, that's something that sustains all the way up through adulthood. I have a really hard time with quiet activities, and so I will put music on in the background. Sometimes when I'm working on something, I'll literally go into Amazon Prime and I'll have a movie going on in the background just to create noise, just to create a little bit of a mild distraction. And it does help. Talking excessively, that is a big thing. And it's hard because what you see is that a lot of times kids get to a point where they no longer talk. That's what we're dealing with now is, hey, how do I get my students to be more engaging and talk? I think that talking excessively, you see that a lot with your elementary kids. And I think that it's educators, parents, teachers, you've got to figure out a way, hey, don't crush that because eventually that's going to balance out with your kids. and you're going to want them to talk. You're going to want them to be more engaging. Teach them and coach them. The other thing that I want to say on that, and this will go a little bit longer than my 40, is that talks excessively. What if that talk is internal? So think about that Ferrari brain and your chatterbox. And I'm a professional talker. I've made a career out of talking. Okay. I'm literally shooting a podcast, talking to a camera. And I bet you if you watch this, it'll feel like I'm talking right to you. That's just how I am. That's how I'm built. I'm visualizing you right now. Now, what if that talking is all internal? What if that talking is me just talking to myself and it's just nonstop? And then let's add this to the equation. What if that internal conversation is negative? What if that internal conversation is about your insecurities, about how you don't know how to fit in, or maybe your brain has been hijacked by, some anger? And so I think that you've got to be mindful of, okay, so again, we're diving into the symptoms and the diagnostic criteria. Those are them, but hey, just something to think about. One of the ADHD types is that inattentive type, and so they may not have that external excessive talking, but internally, they are relentless on themselves. So that's something to consider. Okay, we've got a few more that we'll dive into in the next podcast. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope you're enjoying the stories. Like I said, it does inspire me when you drop me a follow and questions, comments, all of those things. Yeah, this is fun. All right, as always, let's end this thing. If you're on the treadmill listening, it is time to hit that down button and go get a stretch in. And I will look forward to hanging out with you guys in the next podcast. As always, this is Ben Glenn, over and out. Love, peace, and oh yes, my favorite, Lego bricks. God bless.